been looking at or discussing, mentioning, seeing malt tissue or mucosa associated lymphoid tissue. And we found it in places like the tonsils and the Peyer's patches of the small intestine right before the large intestine. So, malt is like an unencapsulated lymph node. It's like an organ without like a proper covering around it to separate it from other tissues. A lymph node proper, it has a much more organized structure that consists of organized follicles. And these follicles house mostly B cells and other surrounding tissue in the lymph node that houses T cells and macrophages. So here in a lymph node, you get it all. The primary tissue within a lymph node is reticular connective tissue. That's the framework. And it's a loose connective tissue, and it's kind of along the spectrum between areolar and adipose tissues. Reticular connective tissue, as its name implies, has a very rich collection of only reticular fibers that are squiggly. No collagen, no elastin. Fluids from lymphatic capillaries can enter into lymph nodes through many afferent vessels, which are on the left side of this diagram. However, there is only one efferent vessel. It's usually larger than all of the individual afferent vessels, but in no way, its size is way smaller than the cumulative diameter of all of the afferent vessels. What am I trying to tell you here? This setup, it causes a bottleneck of fluids, and it allows more B and T cells to come into contact with more of the fluid and inspect that fluid for any pathogens that you think of. So I know that you might think, when I say the term follicle, you might think of a hair, but a follicle is really just some spheroid type of structure of organized cells. In a lymph node, there are primary lymphoid follicles that are composed mostly of B cells, and then there are secondary lymphoid follicles containing mostly T cells and macrophages. These follicles, they also have germinal centers, which contain those hematopoietic, lymphoid, and myeloid stem cells, mostly lymphoid. We had lymphatic capillaries, we have lymphatic vessels, we have lymph nodes, and there are three specialized lymphoid organs. The thymus, easily mistaken for the thyroid when it's late at night and I'm trying to give this lecture. The thymus actually lies above the heart, inferior to the neck and the thyroid gland. Your tonsils are lymphoid organs, and they contain follicles and germinal centers with lymphocytes in them. Some people consider tonsils simply to be malt, mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, and they don't consider it a proper lymphoid organ. However, tonsils have follicles and germinal centers and a capsule. The spleen, located only on the left side of your abdomen, kind of tucked beneath the stomach and pancreas, your spleen is known as the red and white blood cell graveyard. The spleen has white pulp containing an abundance of leukocytes. There's red pulp, also containing an abundance of erythrocytes. And these are both places where these cells are being broken down into their component parts for recycling. I have lymph nodes here with a question mark because technically lymph nodes fit the definition of a lymphoid organ, being an encapsulated organ of follicles and germinal centers. But some people don't consider lymph nodes to be full organs. They consider them to just be lymphatic tissue. Um, yeah, actually, there are many people who don't consider anything to be a lymphoid organ except the spleen. And on that subject, there are some people that consider red blood cells there are some people who consider red bone marrow to be a lymphoid organ. And then there are some people who do not consider red bone marrow to be a lymphoid organ. I do consider red bone marrow to be a lymphoid organ. Personal opinion. Yellow bone marrow is composed of adipose connective tissue, whereas red bone marrow is composed of reticular connective tissue, which is also contained in lymph nodes. That's why I think it's a lymphoid organ. Caught among the reticular network of fibers are usually tons of B cells, just kind of like doing their job, dividing into plasma cells, making antibodies. Woohoo! There's also macrophages that are roaming around. However, there are no T cells, none. The blood capillaries, and here's a capillary here. Oh, this is a big capillary here. These blood capillaries are sinusoidal capillaries. And that's because they have to be the most permeable capillaries to allow the largest of the white blood cells that are being made in the bone marrow to diffuse into these sinusoidal capillaries. Oh, here's one right here. And then be swept away into circulation. In this picture, you can see some other capillaries, and they have like stellate cells around them, which are the macrophages. And then there's even an adipocyte right here, because red bone marrow does have fat in it, and triglycerides with their oil droplet and nucleus pushed to the side, but no T cells.